We welcome Dr. Barbara O'Neill, CFP, AFC, owner, CEO of Money Talk, financial planning seminars and publications, where she writes, speaks, and reviews content about personal finance. Barbara is a Distinguished Professor Emeritus at Rutgers University. After 41 years of service as a Rutgers Cooperative Extension educator and personal finance specialist, she has written more than 160 articles for academic publications, received more than 35 national awards, and received $1.2 million in grants to support her financial education programs and research. Wow, I feel like we are speaking to financial literacy royalty. Welcome, Barbara. How are you?
I'm great, Dan. It's very nice to be here with you and Scott today.
Well, Scott and I were talking beforehand, and I feel like if you add Scott's credentials and my credentials together, we get one Barbara. Scott, here's my math. Scott is CFP. He's written articles and obviously does amazing personal finance work, planning work. I have a PhD. I used to run a school of continuing studies, so maybe similar to your Rutgers program. But when we put it all together, we think we only equal one Barbara.
Well, thank you for the compliment. I appreciate that.
Well, I want to start at the beginning because you've been at this for 4 decades, and we're so impressed by that. What got you interested in the topic of financial literacy?
Well, I think I gradually started to specialize. When I first was hired at Rutgers, I was kind of a jack of all trades. They called us county extension home economists back in the day, and we were expected to do a little work in personal finance, nutrition, human development, all the different areas of the field. And then gradually we all tended to specialize. And I just was very interested in the subject matter and gradually, increased my expertise. I got the CFP and then eventually the AFC, accredited financial counselor, and just began to specialize. And then I realized that if I was going to really make it to the top at Rutgers and become the state financial management specialist, I had to get the PhD. So I did that too. And so it was just over a period of 20 years, just getting more credentials and degrees to do the work that I did.
Well, you mentioned the term home economics, and I've told Scott this story before, but as part of my PhD work at the University of New Mexico, I looked at the history of personal finance instruction. And we used to do this really well in home economics. And I was just amazed by what some of the texts are available through Cornell University. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but
The
they've
library.
digitized. Yeah, it's phenomenal. And I've told Scott this too. You look back at books from the early like 1920s or so, they are literally what we're talking about now. Save little bits of money over long periods of time, diversify, spend less than you earn. And I guess my frustration was, and what my research pointed to was, we began to take these classes out of high school after Sputnik. We freaked out, overreacted with the launch of Sputnik, and redesigned our high school curriculum to focus more on math and science, and something had to go, and it was the life skills classes. So my question is, what was the environment for personal finance instruction at the time you started?
Uh, well, I remember taking a college course, one college course, and I don't remember it having a big impact on my life because I made the $1 million mistake, which you can follow up on if you want. But I gradually just started to enjoy the field and I guess just learning more about the subject matter and starting to invest myself gave me the kind of the confidence to start, teaching others how to do some of these things. And it just kind of built on itself over time.
I am very intrigued by the $1 million
I
mistake.
figured
Scott
you
is
would be.
Googling. Scott, did you
Yeah, I
find
was.
it?
I
I'm-
figured you would be. I didn't lose $1 million. I lost the opportunity to have made $1 million. And the reason I did that is I was always a saver. And I've never actually had a car loan in my entire life. I've always bought cars for cash. So it wasn't like I was a slacker in the savings department, but nobody made the impression on me in my 20s that I should have been saving for retirement, because I
Mm.
was a 20-year-old. Heck, I was even studying for the CFP and it didn't get to me, it was just crazy. Um, so I could have started in the 403B plan at Rutgers when I was 25, and I waited until I was 34. I eventually did become the millionaire, in my 50s, but if I had started in my 20s, I would have had another doubling period, rule of 72. That 1 million could have been 2 million. So I used to tell my students at Rutgers all that time. I tell them that story, and I've told it in many other places where I've reached young adults to just don't make that mistake. But again, I guess I wasn't taught in such a way that it really kind of hit me off on the side of the head and said, "Barb, stave now." And that's the message that I try to get across to young adults today.
Well, you mentioned the kind of classic ages, 25 and 34, which is close to 35. And you know this better than anyone. All
Mhm.
those charts, the person starts at 25, the person that starts
Yep.
at 35. But as you know, that's better than being the person that starts at 45 or 55, right?
Correct. Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, for every decade that you wait, you have to just save so much more to reach whatever goal it is, about 3 times more. So it's, yeah, definitely starting early has its benefits.
I also think, as someone who works with students, I teach a personal finance class still at the University of Redlands. And I think I try to share my mistakes, because I think when they see
Hmm.
someone teaching personal finance, I think, oh, this person's got it all figured out. Gosh, no, I've made multiple mistakes. And I think it's Morgan Housel talks about in his book. We're huge fans of his book, The Psychology of Money,
Hmm.
about how you can make some mistakes. Just, you have to get more right than you get wrong over a long period of
That
time, right?
helps.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I could talk real estate mistakes, but I am not going to do that. We want to talk about you. So when you started teaching, what kind of personal finance classes did you teach, and what kind of students took your classes?
Well, I taught adults. I mean, I did teach high school home economics. It was called that back in the day for 2 years in the 1970s. But once I got hired at Rutgers, I was working in adult financial education. And it really ran the gamut. And in fact, there were days on my career where I would actually have a change of clothes, because what would have been appropriate for a program with single parents with lower incomes would not have been the same attire that you would wear to do a program at the Rotary Club, for example.
Mhm.
So it really ran the gamut. Most of the clientele were probably what you would call middle class, middle income. But I did a number of programs for people who had very low incomes. I generally partnered with agencies in the community that had those students as their clients, and then they would call me in to do a presentation. So it really was a wide gamut of income levels, ages, genders, everything. It was just a slice of people in Sussex County, New Jersey. And depending on what the topic was, that often drove the audience as well. And there was a lot of diversity there.
What are some of your recollections from those early classes? Was there any common threads between these different groups?
Um, Common threads. Well, let me think about that. I think a common thread is that people realized at the end of a financial education program that they could do more than what they thought they could before they started the program, if that makes sense. They increased either their knowledge or their skill level or their confidence or their changed their attitudes perhaps. That was kind of a commonality. I mean, it might be different things for different clients. I'll give you one example. I did a program once for single parents with an agency in Sussex County, and it was a 2-week class. And they didn't have a whole lot of money, for sure, but I was talking about simple savings. And this was back in the 90s, when people still saved change in a jar. Today people are more likely to use a debit card and maybe round up, which gives you the same effect. But 20 years ago, people were still saving a lot of change in jars and spending cash. And so I encouraged the participants in the class to try to save their loose change, and if they could up it even more, to do $1 a day plus loose change. And when we had the second class, one of the participants kind of came in the door and made a beeline for me. I'll never forget it. She came right up to me and said, "You'll never guess what I did." I said, "I don't know. What'd you do?" And she said, "I saved $11." And it wasn't the amount of money that was, very impressive. It was the sense of confidence and empowerment that she had actually done it. She said, "I haven't been able to save that kind of money ever, like in a long time." And so I think that's the kind of thing. You changed an attitude there, that
Yeah.
somebody was going to be willing to, if they can do it once, they can do it again, because success breeds success. So I think that's one of the things that we do in financial education, is we try to help people succeed so that they can move on to even bigger and better things in the future.
What you just described is what I miss most about the classroom. And I don't know if you knew this, but I taught elementary, middle, I taught a little bit of high school and college, and just
Hmm.
this aha moment students have, regardless of the topic. And but I think in particular with personal finance, because it's so much more empowering. It's great to do well in a social studies exam or to get a big concept, but now you're talking about basic needs and your financial stability. So I can just imagine how enormously rewarding that was for you. One more question before I turn it over to Scott.
Hmm.
What would you say the biggest change has been from when you started teaching these concepts to now? Because I always think about, wow, my kids don't have cash laying around. They're using, Venmo and things like that. I'm just curious, what's your perspective on how things have changed?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big change. I've actually, the last couple of days, I'm working on a project for a client back in New Jersey. It's a peer financial education program for college students at a community college there. And so I'm writing FAQs to support the slides in the program that I developed. It's a 4-year grant, so I keep adding new deliverables to the project. And I was doing some research yesterday just to find out, how college students are managing their money. And actually, just this past year, there was a crossover where now students are actually using more peer-to-peer apps than debit cards. Because debit cards used to be the tool of choice, 5, 10 years ago. Now it's the peer to peer. So that's new. Certainly, the interest in Robinhood and the robo kinds of platforms. That's kind of new, all the fintech that we have now that we didn't have 10 years ago. So I think those are the changes. But of course, I would also say that the basics are still there. And probably even some of those basics that they were teaching 100 years ago in those first home economics programs, they're still there. I mean, you try to live below your means, you try to, have positive cash flow. Those are kind of, evergreen types of concepts that need to continue.
Barbara, I saw that you actually tweeted out some of that research. And what surprised me on that was the number one peer-to-peer network, electronic network that students use is
PayPal.
PayPal.
Yeah, I was surprised at that too, because you see hear Venmo all the time as being the one that gets all the buzz. But yeah,
Yeah,
PayPal.
I think the number was like 62%, and like that shocked me because I kind of think of PayPal as like the MySpace of peer-to-peer networks now, but I must be completely wrong about that. I was really surprised. That's very
Yeah,
interesting.
I was surprised too. I find a lot of interesting stuff when I'm working on client projects. I'm very productive on Twitter because I find all these things and I just kind of keep, sharing them out. Um, yeah, I mean it's kind of interesting, but it speaks to the need for sure for financial educators to be familiar with those platforms, how they work, and to be able to teach students how to use them wisely.
That's a good point. Because some of these platforms definitely open you up to scams as well if you're not careful.
Mhm.
That's also one of the reasons I love following you on Twitter, is because I learn all this really interesting stuff that I didn't know. So we really appreciate your research there. I feel like the undereducated one on this particular podcast here, but I want to go back. I've got some other questions for you, but I want to go back to you were talking about you didn't the $1 million mistake. You didn't
Mhm.
start contributing at 25. I'm curious on what your thoughts are in relation to that and auto enroll. Do you feel auto enroll helps with that, or in maybe in a psychological way doesn't help because people might get started, but it's not something they're really paying attention to? What are your thoughts there? Because I mean, I've seen
Mhm.
both arguments, and I prefer auto enrolled to nothing. But what do you think on that?
Yeah, I think you need to have enroll with education because the problem that they have found in research studies is that people take the auto enrollment defaults
Yeah.
and they live with them. So if it's like 3% of pay or very conservative investment options, people never change. And again, like you said, Scott, it's better than doing nothing. But the problem is if people never change away from the defaults, they're probably not the best choice for them. So I think it has to be both. I think you have to have auto enrollment. Auto escalation is great too, because all the research has shown that if you can have people pre-authorize an increase in their contribution when they get an increase in pay, that's going to give them a whole lot more. Um, but again, I think you have to have the education with it so that people clearly understand that your auto enrollment is a starting point. It's not a recommendation that this is where you should be. But the other thing I would point out too is that since you guys work in the 403B world, and I lived in that world for, over 40 years, is that you don't typically find that in the nonprofit sector. Generally, with the 403B plans, at least at Rutgers, I know it was the case, you had to actively seek it out and sign the paperwork to have pre-authorize the money coming out of your paycheck. So in retrospect, tied into my $1 million opportunity mistake, I wish I had had an auto enrollment back in the day, because then it would have started for me in my 20s instead of my 30s.
Absolutely. I think we're seeing it more in higher ed, but definitely not in public K through 14. There's no auto enroll, and
Hmm.
I mean it's worth. It's almost like negative auto enroll the way the way K-12 works. But I want to switch gears, or kind of come back to the personal finance. When did you first come into contact with Tim Ranzetta and Next Gen Personal Finance?
Um, well, Tim and I have known each other almost since the beginning of NGPF, and I met one of his employees who's no longer with NGPF at an AFCPE conference, and I believe it was in 2013. And he kind of made a beeline for me at the poster session and said, "My boss wants me to talk to you and pick your brain about what you're doing for teachers in New Jersey." And so we had a really nice chat. I come to find out Tim Ranzetta was his boss. And so Tim and I just kind of struck up a conversation, and I was doing financial education boot camps for teachers in New Jersey. We got some funding through a state law in New Jersey that gave credit unions the ability to bid to hold public monies, like for a township or a city. And part of that law required that a portion of the profits that these credit unions made for holding public monies had to go to financial education. And then Rutgers, meaning me, was selected to be the financial education provider for the state. And we use the money for professional development for teachers. So I guess he had heard about that. And so my financial education boot camp in New Jersey became the model for what he called fin camps a few years later. And we work together quite a bit. In fact, I just found a couple resources today working on a client project, and I found them online. I put at NGPF in Twitter and said, you might want to use these in an activity, because they were really kind of cool interactive tools that I found. So we communicate very regularly. I totally support what they're doing. I mean, they really have three very strong niche areas, curriculum development, professional development for teachers, and of course, the advocacy work that they're trying to do to get financial education expanded. So I have nothing but praise to say about NGPF.
I saw that link that you had sent out. It was really neat. The ability to compare 3 different financial institutions and across different categories. That was very cool.
Wasn't that kind of cool, where you kind of like move the logos and
Yeah.
then all the information? Yeah, and I found one today that I put out similar to that for credit cards, to compare 3 credit cards side by side.
With NerdWallet, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. See, again, I learned so much by following. FinTwit is amazing. If you're not on Twitter and following these amazing personal financial, I guess we'll say, I don't know, what would we say, creators or celebrities? We'll say many celebrities. You should be on there. We'll make sure that we get your Twitter handle mentioned before the end of the show. But yeah, I saw that with NerdWallet as well, and I thought that was really neat. But yeah, we're big fans of NGPF and what they're doing. The idea of getting this into schools, and at least having a class or even a few weeks of personal finance is so important. I mean, my son went through high school and they didn't have any personal financial literacy. My daughter is about to go to high school next year, and maybe I can get something in there before she graduates. Luckily, her dad's a financial planner, so we have I can have a little bit of influence, but sometimes kids don't listen to their parents when they listen to other people. So that's why I have them read Dan's book, which they actually enjoyed. So good job, Dan. What would you say? How would you assess the state of financial literacy today, and how has that changed over the years?
Oh, I think it's stronger. I think it's changed in a number of positive ways. I mean, first of all, you have organizations like NGPF and the Jumpstart Coalition, the Council for Economic Education. They're all coming together, NEFI, and they're all supporting the advocacy effort, and developing materials, making them very accessible. I guess one big change is, I can remember when I started in financial education, all the curricula were in binders. You had these big, thick binders that held all the curriculum. And of course, they went out of date so quickly. And of course, it might have taken 5 years to, get a reprint or something like that. I mean, that's all gone by the wayside. I mean, now everything's available, quickly. I remember back in the day, NEFI was shipping out all the high school financial planning program materials, and the paper and postage costs must have been
Oh my goodness.
tremendous back in the day. And of course, now everything is online, so it makes it very easy to update materials and to distribute them with links and everything like that. So I think that's really important. The professional development has never been better. We just have, NGPF and the Council for Economic Education doing so much more. And I just wonder, many of those organizations were using much more of a face-to-face model before the pandemic. And I just wonder now, they've proven the success of all the virtual training that they've done. So I can't imagine that the providers will want to be spending a whole lot of money on meals and hotel rooms in the future when you can deliver the training in such a more efficient way online with, breakout rooms and teachers talking with one another. And then I guess the third thing that I would see as being a big difference is the quality of the research that's documenting the effectiveness of financial education.
Yeah.
Back 20, 25 years ago, most of the studies were small scale, limited location, and maybe somebody did one state or one college or university or something like that. But now we've got national data sets, we've got longitudinal data, we have meta-analyses of existing studies. So clearly we're finding relationships between um, having financial education and positive financial behaviors. I did a study a few years ago with a colleague, Jing Zhao at University of Rhode Island, and what we did is we used the FINRA National Financial Capability Study data and all of its metrics for financial capability, which included a knowledge test and a person's self-assessment of their financial capability and analysis of their behaviors, like are they really walking the talk? And then we were able to study that against the different types of financial education that people received, whether they got it in high school, in college, or in the workplace, or all three, or any combination of the three. And what we found is any one of those places where people receive financial education, there was a positive correlation with the metrics of financial capability. So those are the kinds of studies that weren't being done 20, 30 years ago, but they are being done now. And there's, a lot of great researchers in the field that are coming up with all of the positives from financial education. I mean, the GFLEC down in George Washington University with Anna Maria Lasardi and her group, they're just doing some wonderful research, and they have an annual conference every year that focuses in on the impact of financial education. So, that's a big strength that we didn't have, years ago.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more about some of the virtual trainings. I mean, Dan and I have done a lot of traveling in our days, and it's, we love traveling and getting in front of people face to face. It's actually so much fun. But it is also very, very inefficient.
It
I mean,
is.
we could spend like we had this amazing trip to Florida just a few months ago, and we got to speak to over 100 teachers, and they were all fantastic. But it was, 4 days out of our week for 3 hours of education, and it was worth it because we got to talk to so many amazing people and meet some amazing people. But we have been doing online education since the pandemic began, and sometimes we'll get 100, 200 people on an event, and it's just so much more efficient to do that. We can reach so many more people, and we've developed some really amazing relationships even over Zoom. It's not face to face, but it is. I think with that kind of a reach, it does make a lot more sense than doing the traveling. But every so often, it is nice to get out there and shake a hand,
Right.
and all that.
And I think that's the way it's probably going to go. That would be my prediction, is that there will still be some professional development events for teachers, but they will be special, like Jumpstart still planning to have
Right.
its national conference. You will have some unique special events like that, but I think for more of the routine day-to-day type of professional development, I think we're going to see a whole lot more done in the virtual space. And I think we're going to continue to get more tools that will make it even more engaging. I mean, I know Tim and GPF, they use Nearpod a lot, which is very engaging.
Yeah.
And I think there'll probably just be more tools like that in the future.
They also have some really cool personal finance games that you can play,
Oh
which I
yeah, the
think,
games, right?
which is really
The
neat.
arcade. Yeah. Hmm.
What is one of the things that frustrates me a little bit? I'd love to hear your comments on it. Is that a lot of personal finance, a lot of times personal finance or financial literacy is just translated as investing and savings, and which is super important, but is really not the most important thing that most people should be focusing on right away. I mean, there's not a lot. That's the kind of the sexy part, right? That's, you got the Robinhood app, and
Right.
and you can trade stocks and ETFs, and that's so cool. We have some of this stuff, but budgeting, understanding credit, avoiding financial scams, in making sure that you are properly insured to protect yourself, for home, auto, life, disability. I feel like these are all areas that are less sexy and don't get the attention that they need, but they form the foundation that actually allow you to start saving and investing. How do we make that part more interesting? How do we get more focused there? What are your thoughts in that area?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it all comes down to cash flow. I mean, if you don't have the cash flow, you can't do anything else. None of that sexy stuff, the investing or anything. So I think it really comes down to, the basics, the values, the goal setting. I think how you make it engaging to students is just everything needs to be personalized. It's not the concepts, it's the application to of the students with the concepts. So having them analyze their own values, having them write goal statements, having them do various calculations with personal data. Any of that stuff will make it more real to them. Simulations can be great. Case studies can be great. There's a lot of different engaging ways to teach what might be perceived as boring topics.
Right.
So I think, people just have to look at ways to engage students and get them involved in the process. Yeah, I belong to the FinLit Fanatics group, and I'm sure you guys do too,
Uh-huh.
with Next Gen Personal Finance. And their teachers are always posting activities. And one of the teachers last week posted my financial coat of arms activity that I had shared with some of them, and they had a picture of all the financial coat of arms. And then another teacher posted a vision board, and they had all their students doing a 5-year vision of where they want to be. All of those things are just great ways to get students engaged in those topics. And I used to always say to my students at Rutgers that we're going to get to investing, but we got to do the basics first, because you just can't jump in and say, okay, you're going to be buying stock. You got to start with the basics. So they always kind of knew that that was kind of the reward at the end of the semester, that if you kind of got the basics down, then we'd get into all the good stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that students are interested in for sure.
If an education leader is listening to this podcast, what advice would you give them about starting and really sustaining a personal finance program? It seems kind of like a daunting task, especially if a high school has never done this before, and dedicating staff to something like this. What would be your what would you advise them?
Well, I think I would advise them to reach out for resources. And that's, in fact, what happened when I was working in New Jersey, because we had a mandate passed in 2010 for a high school graduation requirement. And then I think it was like back in 2016 or so, we had a mandate for a middle school
Ooh.
requirement as well. One of the few states that has that as well. So I think school administrators were kind of in a panic, but we kind of said to them, we got your back. There are state councils for economic education. There are state Jumpstart Coalition affiliates. There are networks out there that can help these schools. I mean, ideally, financial education shouldn't cost anything. If you have an existing teacher, and it could be somebody in family and consumer sciences, it could be somebody in business, economics, social studies, whatever your teachers are, your existing teachers, they can be certified, trained. I mean, there's certification programs available for teachers in personal finance that can upgrade their skills. The one from NGPF doesn't cost teachers anything. The one from AAFCS, there is a annual maintenance fee, but it's modest. And people can get those certifications at little or no cost. And all the training. I mean, NGPF doesn't charge anything for its training. Most of the other providers don't either. So it doesn't really need to cost anything. The curricular are out there, the training is out there, the network is out there. Because again, FinLit fanatics, they're constantly sharing ideas within the group as to, do you have a tool to do this, or I need something tomorrow to teach that, um, and that's another thing we didn't have 20 years ago is the teacher sharing networks that we have now. Between the social media, I know the business educators have their Twitter handle, and people are doing Twitter chats and webinars and everything. There's just so many more ways that teachers can connect with each other to help one another, and I'm sure the administrators can do that too. So it doesn't need to be um, a big obstacle or something to be afraid of. There are resources galore out there, and schools just need to reach out.
Yeah, you're right. And in fact, in some of NGPF courses, they'll actually pay the teachers to attend and complete those courses, which is kind of amazing as
Oh
well. Because
yeah, they have
that's
the
something.
swag.
Yeah, they got their swag program, which is
Yep. And the gift
fantastic.
cards. Yep.
You mentioned the Finlit's Fanatics, and just for our listeners, so they know, that's actually a Facebook group that you can join,
Mhm.
and just the resources involved in there are just unbelievable. It's got to be a little bit overwhelming, I think, at first when you're like, okay, I got to teach this, and you start getting in, and you're like, oh my gosh, there is so much to know. But I think I remember wanting to teach a financial literacy class at a school like 20 years ago when my wife first got into teaching, almost 25 years ago, and it was so hard to find resources. It was mostly Jumpstart, which was great, but I had to send away for materials. And now there's
Binders.
binders. Yes, the binders, and now it's just all available with a few clicks. And
Mhm.
now it's kind of, how do I assess all this material and figure out what's the best way to go through it and learn it? But it's all there, and the support, like you said, the support network is there also, which is really neat. I want to switch gears and talk about your latest book.
Okay.
So, Flipping a Switch: Your Guide to Happiness and Financial Security in Later Life. Um, one of the, I think, one of the things that we really like as part of this, and something you say a lot, is you're not a big fan of the R word, and in this case, the R word is retirement, where we could say, and you coined this new term. So we've got the FIRE movement, and for our listeners, that's financial independence, retire early. But you coined this other term, which, as a financial planner, I absolutely love. It's financial independence, new directions. And
Mhm.
I have my reasons for loving this particular term, but I want to hear I want to hear you talk about it. What do you mean when you say financial independence, new direction? Find is the term. Instead of fire, it's find. What do you mean by that?
Well, I got to know some of the fire people through FinCon conferences, and it always kind of stood out to me as being kind of strange that you want to leave the workforce in your 30s and 40s and do what? That's a lot of years ahead of you.
Yeah.
And in fact, most of them weren't retiring, like leaving the workforce forever. They were just simply leaving the 9 to 5, formal employment situation. And then of course I found myself getting closer to that milestone myself, and I'm thinking to myself, well, I like working. I love being in financial education. I'm not going to just sit around and play bingo all day or whatever. So I think new directions just implies that you do what makes you happy. And if working, whether it's continuing to work with your current employer or um, starting a business, ramping up a business like I did, volunteering, caregiving for grandchildren. Yeah, I mean, it can be whatever somebody wants, but you get to choose your new direction because you're going to have a new direction, and people really need to know what that's going to be before they exit the workforce. Because you get 2,500 hours. I wrote in the book. If you figure 50 weeks of work with 2 weeks off for vacation. And 50 hours a week between work time and commuting time and everything. That's 2,500 hours. That's a lot of time to fill. So find just means that you look for new directions. And then it doesn't just have to be one thing too. It can be a
Right.
combination of things. There was just a recent podcast that Retirement Wisdom did, and they had somebody talk about a tapas approach to retirement. How you have the little meals and you put them
Uh-huh.
together and you have a big meal. Well, it was kind of like you have little things that you have going on and then you put them together and you filled your day. And I thought that was a really neat concept to describe it. So people just choose what their new direction is going to be.
One of the things that I've noticed in my financial planning career is that that people often see retirement as this destination that they're trying to get to, but they don't think about what's going to be on that tapas menu.
Right.
They don't know they haven't thought at all about what they're going to do in retirement. They think it's going to be this, oh, I don't have anything to do. I can sleep in and. But I'll often counsel, especially, people in their 40s and 50s. They're like, I think you really need to think about what it is that you're going to be doing in retirement.
Mm-hmm.
When you wake up, what are you doing? Yeah, it's okay to sleep in for the first month and do nothing and, whatever, but you're going to get bored really quick. So what are you, like you just said, what are you doing to fill up those 2,500 hours?
Right.
And not only is it important to know that from just a not going insane standpoint, because you got to fill that time. But if you don't know what you're going to be doing in retirement, or if you don't have an idea of what you're going to be doing in retirement, how do you know what it's going to cost?
Exactly. Yeah, you have to have some idea of what you'll be doing, where you'll be living, how are you going to spend your time. Those are just really important things to kind of flesh out from the financial side and also kind of on the emotional side. I can tell you, having moved to a 55 plus community here in Florida, right as the pandemic started, perfect
Oh.
timing. Um, there have been a number of people in a neighborhood that's less than 3 years old that have moved already. And the stories on the street are just people are unhappy, particularly women. I found that was very interesting. But, I kind of wonder if part of the unhappiness isn't the community, because it's a lovely community. It's just, it happened as they retired and they hadn't figured out what the next plan, what the next steps were going to be. And of course, the problem is that the pandemic put a lot of people's plans, kind of blew them up. They couldn't be the snowboards, they couldn't see the grandchildren, they couldn't travel the way they had planned. And so that made it even harder for people to kind of acclimate themselves when the things that they thought they would do, they can't do. So,
Yeah, I can't imagine how difficult that would be. You have all these plans, and then all of a sudden, it's just like I'm stuck right
mhm,
here in my
right.
house.
Well, that happened. That's exactly what's happened for a lot of people. And not me. I continue to work.
No, and we're happy that you do. I always tell Dan or my wife, I'm like, I don't really plan on retiring. I just plan on, slowing down some of my work and doing other things, not having to be necessarily at my desk from, whatever 9 to 5.
Yeah,
Just because I
exactly.
love what I do and
Hmm.
it's fun, and I'll do it even when I'm retired. So I like that new directions. Now, you've got a couple books. Which would you recommend people start with?
Well, it depends on who they are. The problem is, I've written 6 books, but I don't think all but the last one is in print. You may be able to find a few of the older ones on Amazon. I had 2 books that I wrote in the 1990s, and then I had 3 books that I wrote in the 2000s, but they were through a publisher at Cornell that went out of business. So I'd start out with Flipping a Switch, even if people aren't ready to transition into their post-work life yet. It can be a really useful book for middle-aged adults to understand their older parents and also to be thinking ahead for their own lives as to what they're going to do. So certainly I would recommend reading my book, Flipping a Switch, if they can. They can just Google on Amazon and be able to order it that way. I do have a book called Money Talk, A Financial Guide for Women, that I co-authored with an extension colleague, and that book is available on the Rutgers Cooperative Extension website. You can download it as a PDF. And
Ooh.
same thing with my other book, Small Steps to Health and Wealth. So those two, people can download the chapters. Like I said, the publisher went out of business, but we have the PDFs of all the chapters, and they're pretty recent. We did some updates only a few years ago, so they're still pretty evergreen as far as the content.
Well, I think we'll have to get those links and put them in the show notes.
Yeah, I'll give you my website link, because the website has all the information about the books. It
Okay.
also has a number of my podcasts that I've done and webinars, and it's very easy. It's just Money Talk BMO, which is my initials, .com. So
Oh my gosh, I just
that's
figured that out. Got it. Yeah. I was like, what's the BMO? I'm like,
yeah.
oh.
Yeah, that's my initials. Yeah. Well, Money Talk was taken, when I went to set up the website. I didn't set up the website until after I left Rutgers. So Money Talk had already been taken. So
Okay, so I have a controversial question for you, and if you don't want to answer it, great. If you do want to answer it and then you don't like your answer, we'll just cut it out. But I'm a CFP. I've had my CFP since like 2000 or something like that. You're a CFP. CFP stands for Certified Financial Planner or Certified Financial Planning Practitioner. I was initially very happy with them putting in this what I thought was a pretty rigorous fiduciary standard, requiring a fiduciary duty of people who have the CFP. But over the last year, I have read way too many disclosure documents from insurance companies and brokerage firms of people who have CFPs, and basically it's business as usual. You can be a CFP, you can sell really junky products as long as you put out a simple disclosure that says, I'm not actually working in your best interest. I just have to tell you. I'm a little disappointed that the CFP board allows this. I don't think if you work for certain companies, you should be able to call yourself a CFP if you're selling, if you're in a situation that clearly does not put you on the same side as the customer. And again, it's controversial. You don't need to answer this question if you don't want to. We can cut it out. But I love talking to other CFPs and getting their thoughts on this, because it's kind of disappointing to me, because I've been a big promoter of the CFP and we talk about it a lot on this podcast. Thoughts or pass?
well, I think I'll probably pass, because I'm not up on all the politics of the fiduciary standards and whatever. So what I would say, though, is obviously it's in everybody's best interest if the financial advisor works in the client's best interest. And I've always tried to make a point of teaching people how to select a financial advisor, to make sure they understand how they're compensated, giving people options as to where to look to find an advisor. When I worked for Cooperative Extension, I used to have a lot of people that wanted to hire me. So of course that was, totally against our conflict of interest rules and everything. So I actually had a prepared statement that I would kind of insert into an email every time I got one of those requests that would tell people how to find NAPFA, how to find CFP board, because all of those sites have find a financial advisor kind of things.
Yeah.
And I would try to educate people, if you're looking for fee only, go to the NAPFA site. If you're going to the other sites, find out what their compensation model is. Expect a potential conflict of interest if it's commission only. So just kind of educating people on that is important. Disclosure statements are fine, but I think sometimes people have to flesh out that disclosure a little bit more.
No, that's exactly what we tell people as well. CFP is a good place to start, but your homework is not yet done. You still
Right.
have some work ahead of you.
Right. And it's always a good idea to, I always try to encourage people to do a rule of three comparison on anything, particularly things that are big ticket or things that you've never had to purchase before, like a financial advisor services, and just getting some comparison of who's out there and how their prices and their business models differ.
Barbara, just a couple more questions.
Okay.
You
We're
are,
on
we
a
could
roll.
talk, we could talk to you for
I'm
quite
gonna
some
say we've
time.
been at this for a while. That's fine.
Yeah. And we would love to talk about ways we could collaborate, but we'll do that off air.
Okay, sure.
So you're a speaker at an event later today. What is that event and what will you be talking about?
Okay, well, I'm not speaking today. I'm speaking on Saturday, and I have a virtual presentation because I'm not in Austin, Texas. Basically, my presentation is about some of the content of my book, Flipping a Switch, and the value proposition that I presented to FinCon, that obviously they bought it because they selected me as a speaker, was that most of the content creators who attend FinCon are either Gen X, Y, or Z. So they're people that are under 50, young adults. And yet they may have to write about topics that concern older adults, like RMDs, for example, required minimum distributions. So what I'm doing in the presentation, it's not going to air until Saturday because it's virtual, is introducing younger content creators to some of the issues that older adults have top of mind. So things like, downsizing, simplification of their finances, philanthropy, RMDs, managing a reduced income, managing an increased income, tax issues, investing, all of those issues from the lens of an older adult, to help a conference attendee list of primarily younger adults kind of better understand. And hopefully they'll get insights that can help them create better content when they're dealing with some of these older adult topics, and maybe better understand their parents and grandparents too. That's always a good benefit.
Wow, what an important resource, because I have to believe FinCon skews younger. And I know, speaking for myself, I started this advocacy work in my early 30s, and I'm now in my mid 50s, and my focus has changed. I'm now looking at a different sort of dynamic, personal finance dynamic in my own life. So this idea that that they would show the wisdom to bring you into this, I love this idea. Um, Barbara, is there anything else you would like to share?
Wow, that's an open-ended question. You can drive the truck through. No, I mean, I think it's really important for financial educators. So any teachers that are listening, whether it's at the adult community level or with people in K to 12, breaking down information, I think, is really important, because sometimes those of us that are in the financial education planning space, we know our acronyms, we know what we know, and we forget sometimes that people don't know what we know. So I think just breaking content down into small steps, actionable steps, a sequence of steps, you do A, B, C. I think that's important. And then I would just encourage listeners, whether they're professionals in the field or consumers, to try to learn something new every day about personal finance through whatever mechanism you want to do that, and listening to podcasts, webinars, radio, television, blogs, whatever. I personally have a habit now of I walk about 8,000 steps in the morning. So that takes about an hour. So I usually can go through 2 podcasts. And so I just put my cell phone on and data and start listening to podcasts. And so it's a really good use of my time to, work on my health, work on my financial knowledge. So I think that that's really important. Just remember that your financial education is never done because things are always changing.
Scott, I can tell she is a fantastic educator. Personalized instruction, break it up into small, manageable chunks, and continue learning. I mean, I think those are the 3 elements of what makes a great educator. Barbara, you mentioned your website. We will link to that. And that's also how folks can get in touch with you. We just want to say thank you for all that you have done, all that you continue to do, and thank you for your time today.
Oh, you're quite welcome. I'm very glad to have been your guest.